Church killings. Christians call for better protection after attacks on 2 churches in Pakistan kill more than a dozen. Mutual respect. Bishops of Bosnia and Herzegovina challenged by a multi-ethnic and religiously plural population. War weary. We look at a report from the U.S. Catholic bishops on the plight of refugees from Syria's 4-year civil war. And return to penance, encouraging the faithful to receive the gift of forgiveness in the confession of our sins. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Monday, March 16th, 2015. Good evening from Washington. Thanks for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick with your news now. Pope Francis calls for prayers after Pakistani Taliban suicide bombers attacked 2 churches in Lahore. The bombings were hundreds of yards apart. They left 15 people dead, 70 more injured. Jason Calvi is with us now for that story.
Brian, in response to the bloodshed, Pakistani Christians took to the streets, blocked roads, clashed with police, and demanded protection. A day of Sunday worship quickly turning into a nightmare. More than a dozen Christians dead in the Pakistani city of Lahore, including Akash Bashir.
My son was my only hope. He was doing security job inside church. When he saw a man climbing the perimeter wall, he tried to stop him and the suicide bomber detonated his explosives. We are happy that he has given his life to save others' lives.
But Bashir's family mourns him, while protesters raise their voices in the city and in other places in Pakistan.
People who are praying, people in church, defenseless people were attacked, which is a crime. And that's what we are protesting. We are asking the government for protection, for security, and to allow us to pray in peace.
Former member of Pakistan's parliament, Farah Isfahani, says the local government has agreed to give more security to Christians, compensate victims' families, and protect the area until all the dead are buried.
Absolutely shocking thing today, though it's happened many times in the past, is the Prime Minister of Pakistan, instead of rushing to console the victims' families and to go to the hospital to visit the injured members of the Christian community, is instead inaugurating a highway.
Isfahani has studied Pakistani religious minorities for years. She says middle-class Christians left long ago, so those remaining are very poor.
The Pakistani establishment, be it the military or bureaucracy and also the Islamist extremist groups, see the minorities in Pakistan, like the Christians and the Hindus, as impure, non-Islamic. It is, after all, the Islamic Republic of Pakistan.
During his Sunday Angelus, Pope Francis spoke about the bombings. He says the Christians shed their blood solely because they're Christian. He says the world tries to hide the persecution of Christians. Pope Francis says he's praying for peace and harmony in Pakistan and that the persecution ends. The Pakistani Taliban warns there will be more attacks like this one. The protests also proved to be violent. A police officer claims the protesters burned to death 2 suspected terrorists, and 1 Christian protester died after being hit by a car. Brian?
All right, Jason. As the Holy Father prays for Christians in Pakistan, he's also calling for solidarity in Bosnia and Herzegovina. He met today with bishops who are visiting the Vatican from that country. The Holy Father focused on immigration challenges, ministering to a multi-ethnic population, and dimensions of leadership. Francis also underlined the need to create relationships out of mutual respect and support. Pope Francis ended his remarks today, looking forward to his June visit to Sarajevo. Archbishop Joseph Kurtz, president of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, is with us in Washington. You're giving a talk about October's Synod on the Family, Your Excellency. How do you think it will build on the Synod held in Rome last fall?
Well, Brian, thanks for having me on. Our Holy Father has seen the Synod on the Family to be, as we might call it, a double header. So the format in terms of what the needs are and the challenges within our world today and with our church, they were laid out last October. And now the call for our delegates will be to advise our Holy Father, A, on the vocation, and B, on the mission of family within our world and within our church today. So we're going to be looking at the contribution, in the sense that the family can and needs to make within our world.
And prior, of course, to the Synod, The Holy Father will be at the World Meeting of Families in Philadelphia. Before that, he comes to Washington and is expected to address Congress. I wonder, when he comes here in September, do you think that he can bring any unity to a polarized Capitol Hill?
Well, Brian, certainly the Pope hasn't announced formally exactly what his schedule is, but you're right. He has accepted the great invitation to come and address Congress. It's a joint meeting of Congress. He's also going to address, of course, the United Nations. And we have every reason to believe that he's going to talk about what he has done best, and that is the dignity of the human person and the need for us to seek the common good. And I think that's going to bring out the best in our people. We've been having meetings with legislators in preparation for this in the hope that we can have some really bipartisan initiatives.
And Archbishop Kurtz, you've also met with President Obama along with congressional leaders. What are the priorities that you're bringing to these government leaders?
Well, you're not going to be surprised, Brian. Of course, a big issue today is a bipartisan support with regard to immigration, with reaching out to people in need and welcoming them. You know that a big issue is also our whole gift of religious freedom. We want to use the freedom within our church that we might serve others, but we can't tie our hands. And so that's a second important area. And naturally, on the right to life, there are some not good things happening in some of our states. I know in California there's an abortion mandate, and we're looking to turn back and neutralize that terrible burden on our hospitals and on our Catholic institutions.
Archbishop Joseph Kurtz, the Archbishop of Louisville and the President of the USCCB. Archbishop, please be assured of our prayers for you, all of our bishops and our priests, and thank you for being with us.
Thanks, Brian.
And on Capitol Hill tonight, there are calls for more investigations into Hillary Clinton's private email account while she served as the U.S. Secretary of State. Suzanne LaFranchi is at the Capitol tonight reporting.
Brian, House Speaker John Boehner is expected this week to announce a new investigation into Clinton's email practices. It comes as Clinton's camp Sunday claimed her team individually read every email before discarding those deemed private. But to many here on the Hill, that's not good enough.
Suzanne LaFranchi at the Capitol. We'll get that report to you just as soon as we can. Now, some of the other stories our EWTN News Nightly team has been covering in today's world. A 20-year-old protester is being charged in last week's shootings of two Ferguson, Missouri police officers. The St. Louis County prosecutor says Jeffrey Williams faces 2 counts of first-degree assault as well as other charges. He says Williams told police he meant to fire at someone else, not the officers. The 2 officers have since been released from the hospital. They were shot early Thursday as demonstrators gathered outside Ferguson's police department. The city's police chief had just resigned in the wake of a critical Justice Department report. The Catholic Archdiocese in New Delhi, India, calls for prayers while condemning the rape of a 71-year-old woman religious. The victim is in serious condition in a hospital after the attacks by 7 or 8 men this weekend. The sister was allegedly beaten and raped for trying to stop the men from robbing the convent where she lived. The Delhi Catholic Archdiocese calls the attack a very sinful act. The investigation is ongoing. No arrests have been made. The U.S. and Iran dive into what's being called a critical round of negotiations. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry met with Iran's foreign minister in Switzerland today. They're discussing Iran's nuclear program with a deadline looming in 2 weeks. They also talked about a letter to Iran's leader from 4 dozen U.S. senators warning against a nuclear agreement. It's been openly criticized by the leaders of Iran as well as the Obama administration. Russian President Vladimir Putin makes his first public appearance today in more than a week. His 10-day absence has sparked speculation about what was keeping him from the public eye. When the 62-year-old postponed his Kazakhstan trip last week, there were claims that he was sick. However, he looked healthy in the new on-camera interview that was released today. Putin also reveals in the interview that he considered readying Russia's nuclear arsenal during last year's standoff with the West over Crimea. Italian fashion duo Dolce & Gabbana voiced support for traditional marriage. The prominent designers recently told Italian magazine Panorama, "We, a gay couple, say no to gay adoptions. Enough chemical children and wombs for rent. Children should have a mother and a father." They also say the family is not a fad. The designers have put the traditional family at the center of their last two collections. They've sent a pregnant model and models with their own children down the runway as a tribute to mothers. Dolce has previously told a UK newspaper he doesn't believe in gay marriage and he is a practicing Catholic. Pope Francis denounces low wages paid to teachers. He's saying the duty
Il dovere di un buon insegnante, a maggior ragione di un insegnante cristiano.
Pope Francis saying the duty of a Christian teacher is to love difficult and disadvantaged students with great intensity. The Holy Father told members of a teachers' association that teaching is a beautiful and poorly paid job. He says teachers have a great responsibility. They can become like spiritual parents, especially to students who test their patience. The president of Vanuatu, a group of Pacific islands, pleads for help tonight. Tropical storm Pam has battered his small country. And Wyatt Goolsby has that story.
Demolished houses, uprooted trees, crushed cars, all the work of what's being called a monster cyclone that hit the island nation of Vanuatu in the South Pacific Ocean.
We run with our children and with all our beds and all our baskets, and we ran to the timber factory.
The country's president says more than 90% of homes and buildings in the capital city have been destroyed.
Very emotional, very emotional. As head of the nation, my heart is for the people.
The cyclone hit late last week.
Wednesday was fine, Thursday got windy, Friday we got blown away. We were at
hell.
Yeah. You what?
All turned to hell, really.
Australians Haley and Trent Williams spent their honeymoon on the island.
The devastation.
Devastation, destruction, yeah.
This beautiful 5-star resort just
flattened.
Rubble.
Meanwhile, aid is finally arriving in the country. This Australian military plane was among the first to arrive, carrying water and medical supplies as well as shelter kits. Officials say the cyclone has impacted about half the country's 267,000 inhabitants. Wyatt Goolsby, EWTN News Nightly.
Coming up, Iraqi troops fighting the Islamic State on 3 fronts. And we visit the plight of refugees from Syria's long, deadly civil war. On EWTN News Nightly for Monday, the 16th of March, back to Capitol Hill, where there are calls for more investigations into Hillary Clinton's private email account. While she served as Secretary of State, our Suzanne LaFranchi is at the Capitol tonight. Suzanne?
Brian, House Speaker John Boehner is expected later this week to announce a new investigation into Clinton's email practices. It comes as Clinton's camp Sunday claimed her team individually read every email before discarding those deemed private. But to many here on the Hill, that's not good enough. Hillary Clinton was inducted today into the Irish America Hall of Fame as she tries to put last week's email scandal behind her. However, Clinton's revelation that she exclusively used a private email account while at the State Department seems to have raised more questions than answers.
The server contains personal communications from my husband and me, and I believe I have met all of my responsibilities, and the server will remain private.
Perhaps not. Word comes John Boehner is expected to conduct yet a new House investigation into Clinton's practices. Clinton has admitted to sending 60,000 emails, half of which were personal and deleted. Some of those emails have been turned over to a congressional committee investigating the deaths of 4 Americans at a U.S. facility in Benghazi, Libya in 2012. Clinton, who is putting women's issues at the center of her likely second run for president, may be employing the so-called War on Women strategy, an often used campaign plan of the Democratic Party. This afternoon, a panel of conservative women attacked the War on Women mantra, entitling their discussion War No More. Headlining the event, Carly Fiorina, who, within an hour of Clinton's email news conference, took to Twitter questioning Clinton's trustworthiness. The potential Republican presidential nominee and former CEO of Hewlett-Packard criticized Democrats' big government entitlement agenda, saying it's especially harmful to women.
We have to disentangle that web of dependence because we're trapping people in it who want something better for themselves. We make it so hard to escape poverty, and that's not helping anyone.
Kellyanne Conway, a conservative pollster who is also at the forum, predicts that the war on women strategy will not motivate female voters in 2016. She says if Hillary Clinton is indeed the Democratic nominee for president, she will need more than her gender to connect with women. Brian?
Suzanne LaFranchi, thank you from the Capitol. Iraqi troops are now fighting ISIS on 3 different fronts. The Iraqi military continues battling for control of Tikrit, Saddam Hussein's hometown. They're conducting airstrikes on the city of Ramadi. The Iraqi Air Force is also targeting ISIS positions in the city of Karma. The civil war in Syria has now reached the 4-year mark. 11 million have lost their homes. 3.8 million people have fled the country. As the conflict worsens, a group of 21 humanitarian agencies is saying the UN Security Council has failed Syria. The report shows 4.8 million Syrians live in places without access to relief. That's nearly double 2013 levels. Humanitarian needs have increased 31% since 2013. More than 5.5 million children now need aid, and funding to meet those needs has decreased by 14% since 2013. Wayne Flotten is the Syria Crisis Response Director for World Vision. You're based in Amman, Jordan. Can you give us a picture of how this refugee crisis is affecting both these countries, of Syria and Jordan?
In Jordan, approximately 10% of the population are now from Syria. And so it's very similar to the entire population of Canada moving down to the United States within the last 4 years. And when you look at the issues around education, the way people draw on social services, et cetera, the impact on Jordan itself is extremely significant. In addition, people are moving around Syria. They feel like they are not able to establish themselves to stay safe. And so all in all, it's a very difficult situation for everyone.
I don't think any of us really realize what it would be like to be a refugee. Can you give us a sense of the morale among these people who have been displaced?
I want to go home is a phrase that we hear frequently from children. They would very much like to go back to their own countries, and yet they do not know what would be waiting for them. At this point in time, what faces them for someone who is trying to earn income for their family, they're actually not able to join the formal workforce. Most of the children do not have access to education when they are living in other countries, and it's just a very difficult situation for them.
So your group recently conducted a poll surveying people like us as to how aware we are of this crisis. What did you find?
The results were quite disappointing and actually quite astounding. If you look at it from the fundraising point of view, over the last 4 years, the World Vision Office in the United States has raised about $2.6 million in private funding. When the Haiti earthquake hit, they raised about $5.4 million in 1 week. And so this is a protracted crisis, and so it makes it more and more difficult for people to keep their attention on the situation in Syria.
But the numbers are staggering in terms of how many people are affected by this. Are they not?
Yes, that's correct. The estimate is about 12.2 million people, but the population that have been affected is greater than the combined population of people affected by the Katrina earthquake, the Haiti earthquake, and the tsunami in 2004.
Well, hopefully there are more people who are more aware now as a result of our conversation. Wayne Flotten with the Syria Crisis Response for World Vision. We thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Brian. It was a pleasure to be here.
And up next, we return to Rome, where churches stay open all night for priests to hear confessions, and many Catholics are fasting today. We'll tell you why. On this Monday, the 4th week of Lent, of course, a time of penance for millions around the world. Thank you for joining us for EWTN News Nightly. I'm Brian Patrick. Pope Francis encourages Catholics to return to confession during the season of Lent. On Friday, the Holy Father opened 24 Hours for the Lord, which celebrates Lent as a penitential season. The celebration is designed to widen access to the sacrament of reconciliation. Parishes opened their doors for extended periods with priests available to hear confessions. Pope Francis launched 24 Hours for the Lord for the first time during last year's Lenten season. Father Marco Gnavi heads the Office for Ecumenism and Interreligious Dialogue for the Diocese of Rome. And Father, how did people respond to your parish remaining open all night for this penitential celebration?
Oh, it was an enthusiasm for this proposal to get to Jesus and to be offered a hug from the Heavenly Father, and in the sense that an overcrowded basilica, this is my experience last night, reached the confessors, and so many young people had a chance to be nourished by this mercy.
As a confessor, hearing confessions, I know that that is one of the real joys of the priesthood. This has to warm your heart to see that people are coming back to the Lord in this way, right?
Yes, there are many coming back, as the young son of the parable of the merciful Father, who are in need to be close to the house of Father. And this is, in the tongue of the contemporary days, means meeting again, fraternity, brotherhood, motherhood of the Church, to get to the fatherhood of God. And the tongue spoken by these young people and by the people is the tongue of the contemporary men and women who like to realize how much the gospel is a good news for them.
Father Marco Gnavi from Rome, thank you for joining us, Father. We appreciate it.
Thank you to you. Thank you.
And meanwhile, in D.C., Catholics came together here on Capitol Hill to fast and pray for what they call climate justice. The Global Catholic Climate Movement hosts a 40-day Lenten fast. The group prays for unity within the Catholic Church on the issue of climate change. The Franciscan Action Network held a prayer vigil on Capitol Hill today. One of the organizers of the vigil tells us this is an interfaith initiative.
Part of our goal today, part of what we're trying to do is
a papal encyclical on the environment is expected from Pope Francis early this summer. More than 50 countries have pledged to host one day of fasting during Lent and to reduce their waste and carbon consumption. Well, there's a lot of green, as in this kind of green, in St. Patrick's Day celebrations. A national retail survey reports more than 127 million Americans say they plan to celebrate, and I'll bet they're not all Irish. The report says consumers ages 25 to 34 will spend almost $42 apiece on St. Patrick's Day celebrations. Total spending is expected to be around $4.6 billion. That is slightly lower than last year. Weather may be a contributor to that part of the decline, but also big St. Patrick's Day parties are usually a bit of a tough sell when March 17th falls on a weekday, as it does this year. Well, until tomorrow, we encourage you to like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter. If you'd like to watch again, you can go to our YouTube page at EWTN. For the EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Brian Patrick. Good night, and may God bless you.